In the early months of 1968, a lonely outpost near the Laotian border became the center of the world's attention. Khe Sanh Combat Base, perched amid red clay hills and fog-wrapped valleys, was surrounded by the North Vietnamese Army. For the 6,000 U.S. Marines inside, life had shrunk to trenches, bunkers, and mud. For Washington, it became a test of will, whether America could hold against a siege that echoed the French disaster at Dien Bien Phu 14 years earlier. The siege began in late January, just days before the Tet Offensive erupted across South Vietnam. The North Vietnamese had spent months preparing, moving in heavy artillery and troops from Laos under cover of jungle canopy. They built camouflaged gun pits, trench networks, and supply lines right up to the wire. Inside Khe Sanh, Marines of the 26th Regiment, supported by artillerymen and a few tanks, endured near constant shelling. More than 1,000 shells fell daily, shattering bunkers and supply depots, turning the airstrip into a crater scar. The strategic logic was twofold. For the North Vietnamese, it was an opportunity to lure American forces into a remote region and destroy them in a set-piece battle. For General Westmoreland and the U.S. Command, holding Khe Sanh meant demonstrating that American firepower and air superiority could not be beaten. The base also guarded Route 9, the critical east-west road linking the coast to Laos, and the Ho Chi Minh Trail that fed the southern insurgency. Codenamed Operation Scotland, the defense relied on air power. B-52 bombers flying from Guam dropped thousands of tons of bombs around the perimeter. The Marines called it the Ring of Steel. The surrounding jungle was pulverized, but the NVA dug deeper, reappearing after each bombardment. Daily resupply flights braved anti-aircraft fire to deliver ammunition and food. Many never returned. As February bled into March, American planners realized that Khe Sanh could not be relieved from the air alone. If the base fell, the loss would be political as well as military, a signal that the United States could not defend even its own strong points. In Saigon and Washington, the question grew urgent. Could reinforcements reach Khe Sanh before it was overrun? By mid-March 1968, the U.S. High Command concluded that the siege of Khe Sanh could not be broken by air power alone. General William Westmoreland ordered a full-scale ground relief effort, Operation Pegasus. Its objective was simple to define but perilous to execute. Reopen Route 9 from the coastal base at Dong Ha through the mountains and reach Khe Sanh before the North Vietnamese could overwhelm it. The responsibility fell to the 1st Cavalry Division Airmobile, fresh from the battles of the Central Highlands. Under Major General John Tolson, Pegasus would be a combined arms operation involving U.S. Marines, Army Cavalry, and units of the Army of the Republic of Vietnam. In all, more than 20,000 men would move through some of the harshest terrain in Vietnam: steep ridges, triple canopy jungle, and narrow valleys dominated by concealed NVA positions. Helicopter mobility would define the plan. The 1st Cav intended to leapfrog from fire support base to fire support base, securing high ground along Route 9 while engineers rebuilt the road behind them. Artillery batteries would be airlifted onto ridgelines, and supplies slung beneath Hueys and Chinooks. Meanwhile, the 1st Marines would push west from Camp Carroll, converging with the cavalry in a pincer toward Khe Sanh. Logistically, it was one of the most complex undertakings of the war. Hundreds of helicopters had to coordinate in tight mountain airspace under threat of ground fire. Each landing zone was swept by artillery and napalm before troops went in. Weather added to the danger. Spring fogs rolled off the highlands, grounding aircraft and reducing visibility to meters. But the pressure was unrelenting. Every day Khe Sanh held out was another day of bombardment casualties and dwindling morale. To the men on the ground, Operation Pegasus carried a sense of urgency and symbolism. They were not merely relieving a base. They were proving that American mobility and coordination could achieve what the French had failed to do in 1954. Yet intelligence warned that entire NVA divisions lay entrenched along the route. The relief force would have to fight for every hill, every meter road, and every supply drop. At dawn on April 1, 1968, with the roar of rotor blades echoing through the mist, Operation Pegasus began to, as the sun lifted through the fog on April 1, 1968. The air over Quang Tri Province filled with helicopters. The 1st Cavalry Division began its assault westward from Dong Ha, supported by marine armor and artillery. Dust swirled through the valleys as Hueys ferried soldiers into clearings, their rotor wash bending the jungle grass. The operation's pace was relentless, an airborne ballet of coordination where every flight, every drop, every ridge gained meant another step closer to Khe Sanh. The first major objectives were the ridgelines known as Hills 471, 552, and 689, high points overlooking Route 9 that had been turned into fortified North Vietnamese positions. As the 3rd Brigade of the 1st Cavalry pushed forward, they encountered heavy resistance. The NVA fought with discipline, using deep bunkers and interlocking fields of fire. Artillery support from Camp Carroll and aerial bombardment pounded the slopes before the troopers advanced. But the fighting was close and costly. Farther south, Marine units advanced along the shattered road itself, engineers cutting through wrecked bridges and craters left by years of shelling. Bulldozers and tanks moved side by side with infantry, their treads grinding through red mud as they cleared mines and obstacles. The sound of chainsaws echoed through the valleys as men hacked through bamboo and brush to widen the path for convoys that would soon follow. The NVA, realizing the scale of the relief effort, began withdrawing from exposed positions, favoring hit-and-run ambushes. Yet even in retreat, they inflicted heavy casualties. At fire support base gates and along the ridges near Khe Sanh, the cavalry fought through mortar barges and sniper fire. Medevac helicopters darted through smoke to extract the wounded, their pilots navigating by instinct and courage. Each day, Route 9 crept westward. American reporters described the advance as a moving city of helicopters, hundreds in the air at once, lifting troops, fuel, and artillery. By April 5th, the leading elements were within 20 kilometers of Khe Sanh. The Marines inside the base could hear the distant rumble of artillery and knew rescue was approaching. Yet between the relief columns and the besieged outpost lay the most dangerous ground. The NVA strongholds guarding the high hills north of the base to be why the 2nd week of April, Operation Pegasus, had gained momentum. The 1st Cavalry's forward elements were now within striking distance of the Khe Sanh Plateau. But the last ridges were the most lethal. The North Vietnamese had prepared their defenses with precision, burying bunkers into the hillsides, camouflaging mortars, and planting dense minefields. Every advance required artillery coordination, aerial spotting, and ground assault working in unison. Hill 881 South and Hill 861A, names already burned into Marine memory from earlier battles, had to be cleared once again. The terrain was punishing, steep slopes of churned red mud and elephant grass concealing enemy trenches. Troopers from the 2nd Battalion, 7th Cavalry fought uphill under machine gun and mortar fire, sometimes advancing just meters at a time. Air strikes roared overhead, the thunder of napalm rolling across the valleys, followed by the rhythmic thud of artillery. When the smoke lifted, the hilltops revealed networks of tunnels and shattered bunkers. Meanwhile, on the ground below, Marine armor continued its push along Route 9. Engineers bridged streams under fire, while convoys moved forward carrying ammunition, food, and medical supplies. Each kilometer gained came with casualties, snipers in the treeline, mines buried in culverts, sudden ambushes from hidden trenches. But morale was rising. Radio intercepts confirmed that the NVA was pulling back westward toward Laos, unable to withstand the combined weight of ground and air attacks. By April 6th, the leading units of the 1st Cavalry made contact with Marine patrols from the Khe Sanh perimeter. The long siege was effectively broken. Helicopters circled overhead as men from both sides of the relief line shook hands, exhausted, caked in mud, but alive. The Marines who had endured 77 days under siege now watched convoys roll through the gates for the first time since January. For them, the arrival of Pegasus was not just relief. It was proof that they had not been forgotten. As supplies poured in and wounded were evacuated, Khe Sanh's battered airstrip reopened. For the United States Command, the operation was hailed as a victory, a demonstration that mobility and coordination could achieve what firepower alone could not. But even in success, questions began to surface about what would come next. Did I end the days following the relief? The scene at Khe Sanh was both triumphant and grim. The air was heavy with the smell of burned fuel, cordite, and wet earth. Wrecked bunkers and shell-pocked trenches stretched across the hills. Marines who had survived the 77-day siege emerged pale and hollow-eyed, their ranks thinned by casualties and disease. Yet for the first time in months, helicopters landed freely, bringing fresh supplies and medevac flights. Operation Pegasus had succeeded. The road was open, and Khe Sanh was no longer isolated. General Westmoreland praised the mission as evidence of American resolve and technological superiority. In raw numbers, the operation had been one of the largest coordinated airmobile efforts of the war. Over 20,000 troops moved, 14 artillery batteries repositioned, and 1,300 helicopter sorties flown daily. Within 10 days, the siege that had gripped global headlines was declared broken. To the American public, the images of smiling Marines shaking hands with the cavalry became symbols of endurance. Yet beneath the celebration, unease grew. The cost had been enormous. Hundreds killed or wounded, countless aircraft lost or damaged, and entire villages flattened in the crossfire. The very geography that made Khe Sanh strategic also made it indefensible in the long term. Its isolation near the Laotian border turned every resupply into a gamble, and its airstrip remained under threat from artillery hidden in the surrounding hills. Intelligence analysts quietly questioned whether the base was worth the blood it had drawn. By June 1968, just weeks after Operation Pegasus ended, the decision came down from Saigon. Khe Sanh would be evacuated and destroyed. Engineers set charges to demolish bunkers, ammunition dumps, and radar stations. Helicopters lifted off with the last Marines as explosions echoed through the valley. For many who had fought to reach the base, the withdrawal felt hollow. A victory erased almost as soon as it was won. Still, the operation had demonstrated something profound. That large-scale coordination between Army, Marine, and Air Force units could be achieved under impossible conditions. Khe Sanh was a tactical success, yet it also marked a turning point. The realization that success in Vietnam no longer translated into progress. As the dust settled over the abandoned base, the war moved elsewhere. But its lessons lingered. When the last helicopters lifted off from Khe Sanh in July 1968, the base that had once symbolized American determination vanished into the mist. Within weeks, the North Vietnamese quietly reoccupied the area. The red hills that had cost so many lives returned to jungle silence, littered with twisted metal and shattered bunkers. For many veterans, Operation Pegasus remained both a triumph and a question mark, a mission completed, yet strategically uncertain. The relief of Khe Sanh became part of the broader American narrative of Vietnam. Overwhelming firepower, achieving local success without changing the outcome of the war. The siege and its rescue were studied in military academies as examples of air mobility, logistics under fire, and the psychological importance of symbolism in modern warfare. Yet in the villages that dotted Route 9, the scars were physical. Bomb craters turned into stagnant ponds. Unexploded shells remained buried in the soil. Civilians who had fled during the fighting often returned to find only ruins. For the soldiers who took part, Pegasus was remembered for its extremes. The dizzying coordination of helicopters, the deafening artillery barrages, the exhaustion of climbing hills under monsoon rain. Some remembered the relief of reaching the besieged Marines. Others, the futility of watching Khe Sanh abandoned weeks later. The war rolled on into new campaigns at Hue, the A Shao Valley, and along the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Khe Sanh became another battle in a conflict that refused to end. Decades later, historians would debate its meaning. Some argued that holding Khe Sanh had drawn North Vietnamese divisions away from the Tet Offensive's main thrusts, saving other cities from collapse. Others saw it as a costly diversion, a fixation on terrain that no longer mattered in a guerrilla war. What remained beyond debate was the courage of those who fought there, both in defense and in relief. Today, the former combat base is a quiet memorial. Rusted helicopter frames sit beside trenches reclaimed by grass. Visitors walk through what was once no man's land, guided by the wind that still moves through the valley. Operation Pegasus stands as a reminder of the length soldiers went to reach their comrades, and how even victory, in Vietnam, came shadowed with loss.